how do you think the pandemic has impacted our experiences with trauma? I mean, I imagine, and I've been hearing and reading that a lot of folks are experiencing, self-isolation, sense of course, perhaps increases in depression, anxiety, obviously joblessness, and so forth and so on. So how do you think the pandemic has impacted people's experiences with trauma, and what are the tools that you're kind of offering and hoping to provide the folks in that situation?
Yeah, it's bad right now. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's really challenging because humans are social beings. Even if you're an introvert, there's some amount of social connectivity that we sort of inherently crave. It's woven into our DNA. And so the isolation is taking its toll on everyone. And even myself, like, I'm on Zoom all day, every day, but it's not quite the same. And so there's something called co-regulation that happens when we're in social situations where, like, our nervous system calms down and we feel safer than we do when we're isolated. And so that's something that we're not able to get as easily. And so if you're in a position to be able to join some kind of support group or work with a therapist, it's not going to be the same as having, all of your friends and family with you. But getting support right now, I think, is more important than ever, because this is an overwhelming situation. This is going to overwhelm most people's coping capacities, and all of our natural go-to things are mostly off limits at the moment. And so finding ways to get support, even if it's virtual support, I do think is better than nothing. And also finding practices that allow you to calm your nervous system, whether that's meditation or going for walks if you live in a place where you have access to outdoors, taking a bath, doing slow, mindful presence activities, things that like coloring or needle pointing or whatever, like anything with your hands, crochet, all of these kinds of things. They sound very simple, but they allow you to calm yourself down and relax. And there's nothing wrong with distracting yourself too. I mean, I think being on social media or the news or working all day can take its toll at a time like this. And so if there are things you like to do, like watch movies to unwind, highly recommend doing some of that as well.
Yeah, I love all that. Those are all things that obviously are around us, hopefully in our spaces, if we are fortunate enough to be in, as you said, in a safe space where we can access those things. For creative folks, a lot of our community and our audience globally are creative people, whether they're filmmakers or they're actors or they're cinematographers and so on. I had a life coach say to me recently that, especially during this time, creative people need to be creative, which I thought was such a simple way, but something maybe we forget sometimes in these moments. What are your thoughts on how creative folks can in particular manage this crisis and take care of their mental well-being?
Well, as a creative person, this is a generalization, and I know not all creatives are the same, but we tend to be more sensitive. And so, and I think a lot of us also tend to be introverted. So some of that may be like playing into our favor at the moment, but there is something about, feeling deeply that I think lends itself to inspiration, to wanting to create beautiful things, or maybe sad things or scary things too. But most people don't start creating art because they don't feel much, I would say. And so I think this is a particularly challenging time if you are feeling a lot, because there's a lot of collective angst that if you're sensitive, you're likely picking up on. And so, if you're able to, I do think this is a time to channel that creative energy in whatever ways that you can. And, I used to be a musician, and I'm not doing that as much anymore, but I know in my darkest times, that's usually when I was the most prolific. And even for me right now, my creativity sort of shifted more toward, social impact work online. But that's also creative for me. And so it's more writing and graphic design. And And I would say, like, maybe don't be afraid to pivot. If your usual go-to creative outlet isn't like feeling juicy for you, maybe try a different one and see if there's something else that's calling to you. But there's energy that's going to want to move. And I think where people get stuck is when that energy kind of gets trapped in the body. And so if you usually sing, maybe try dancing. If you usually dance, maybe try to pick up an instrument. If you usually play instruments, maybe pick up a paintbrush or whatever you have access to. But if you're feeling stuck, I think finding some way to move the energy through is going to be helpful.
Right, finding some outlet. And I imagine, I don't know if you've seen this in your work, but in my own experience in talking with other creatives, especially in entertainment, that self-sabotage also seems to play a common role in our work, in our lives, which I imagine might be magnified. I think it is for me and probably other creators, writers, actors during this time, where it's a sense of, well, it won't matter anyway, or, you know, no one's going to see it, we'll never get out of this. What are your thoughts, since I know you work a lot in self-sabotage? Do you have specific thoughts for folks who are creative, who might be dealing with that, or just artists in general who, you know, are always trying to, I feel like, go up a mountain, but maybe feel like they can never quite get there?
Yeah. So I have a free class for this available on my website, because it's a nuanced topic that's hard to turn into a soundbite. It's like an hour-and-a-half class where I dig into this quite deeply. But the really short version is that self-sabotage is usually a response to impossible binds that we faced in childhood. Like we needed to connect with our parents or caregivers to survive. And in order to connect with them, we often have to change things about ourselves. We adapt, we shift, or maybe it's not even our parents or the people taking care of us, it's our environment itself. Like we talked about racism earlier. If you have to change who you are fundamentally to adapt to an environment that's not supportive for you, that's, first of all, that's traumatic. But second of all, those adaptations become learned behaviors, they turn into patterns. And even as we go into adulthood, maybe those situations change. Maybe we don't have to preserve that relationship or, you know, change ourselves to fit into society quite as much as we did when we were little. But those patterns, unfortunately, don't just like evaporate the moment we leave the house or the moment we turn into adults. And so a lot of those behaviors may have been helpful for us at one time, but later on they start working against us. And so a lot of working with self-sabotage is understanding, okay, like when would this behavior have been protective for me in some way? Like maybe being seen and like putting myself out there would have actually resulted in a lot of pain as a child, so I had to learn not to do that. And so once we kind of start to uncover the hidden logic of the self-sabotage, then we're able to start to bring at least an element of choice into it. It's like, okay, do I want to protect myself in this way now, or do I not? And then it's sort of up to you what you want for yourself.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me of cognitive behavioral work, where it's recognizing patterns, right? And then sort of by recognizing them, we can work through them.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah.
We wanted to get to your anti-racism work, which I think is really awesome and just terrific that you're speaking out on that issue. Before we do that, I wanted to close the loop around trauma and loss specifically, because I do feel like obviously people are going through a lot of loss right now in so many different ways, whether that's loss of loved one to COVID-19 or loss of our daily lives and so forth. Could you talk a little bit about that, just how you feel like folks should or could cope with loss in this time, and if there are tools in the toolbox that you recommend they look at?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is that human beings are not designed to process loss alone. There's a reason over the millennia people come together for funerals, and there are, you know, in different cultures, there are different rituals around death and passing and loss. And this is where it's tricky right now, because finding that community is difficult, and I've really had to create that for myself as well, and like go out of my way to schedule calls with friends and, you know, Zoom gatherings for my family and things that I didn't normally do before. But if you're able to find some way to connect with others, I know there are quite a few support groups for people who've lost loved ones to COVID-19. You know, my husband's business has been closed, and so he's kind of found this community of business owners in the Bay Area that are kind of coming together. I think there's something about being with people who understand what you're going through that maybe other people wouldn't be able to understand, that can be very helpful. And the internet is a valuable resource in that. We can connect with people all over the world. I mean, in my program right now, I have people from Saudi Arabia and Canada and South America. So there are people out there that are sharing your experience, and it's not always easy to find them, but I believe we have some tools that humans haven't had previously to be able to make those connections.
Right. At least we're fortunate that we can connect in that remote way. Want to talk about your anti-racism work, Iris, and you know, I know you've been posting quite a bit about it online. Curious to get your thoughts around, you know, sort of this notion of cleaning your consciousness, what that looks like, and how might one go about do that, or how might one go about unlearning harmful behavior, particularly as white folks, or as whatever their privilege is, from male privilege, white privilege, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, I think for me, curiosity is your biggest asset, and recognizing that there's so much we don't know. I will never have a lived experience of living in a Black body, for example, and there's no way for me to get there. There's no way for me to understand that. But the more I accept that I don't understand, the more space there is for me to learn and ask questions and to question my own beliefs and to take in information from different sources. I think that's something that is challenging for some people. We have these identities that form around like, no, I'm a good person and good people aren't racist, so I'm not racist. And there's very little room in that to start examining our implicit biases. And, you know, human beings are sort of wired to make these, we chunk information. It's more efficient for the brain processing. And so biases happen in that. And so if you think that you don't have any, I would suggest you haven't looked closely enough, because we all do. And that's just part of being human. And that doesn't mean that we're doomed to just stereotype people, but it does mean that if we don't open our minds, if we're not curious, we don't seek out new information and seek out connections and friendships with people from different cultures, we're going to stay locked in a very narrow view, and that's not healthy for our society overall, because we are in a very blended society. And so if we want to get along, we have to be learning from each other as much as possible.